Alan had a very distinguished career in the public service, and he has previously spoken to us about the workings of the federal parliament in Canberra, that is the workings in terms of the logistics as to how everything happens, because he was in charge of all that for quite a long time. What he's going to speak to us now is about the federal parliament building and various aspects about that, looking forward as far as the future is concerned. So he hasn't got a visual presentation, but I think he might have some material, some photographs that he's going to hand around. All right?
Okay, so thank you very much. Little sound test, can you hear me in the back row? Yeah, good. Yeah, and look, just a little bit of personal history. The Thompson family moved to Rosanna, moved from Essendon to Rosanna in '57, and pretty quickly after that we got to know one of the neighbours. His name was Keith Tupper, who lived not very far away, and hence me tapping Keith on the shoulder. He's a bit older than me, but nevertheless he was fixture in Rosanna in Arden Crescent for how long, Keith? 60 years?
55 years.
55 years, yeah. I guess, again, just a bit of preliminaries again about me. I guess I've taken an interest in the subject of Australia's Parliament, partly because a lot of my career was working in various public services in Victoria, for the Commonwealth Government, for the New Zealand Government, and for the ACT Government. And that each of those gave me a sampling of how different parliaments work. And then my final full-time job was actually on the Hill in Canberra, leading what's called the Department of Parliamentary Services, which is the people who do the security, look after the Hansard records, look after the libraries, look after all the IT systems on the Hill. And my time there was during the Rudd era. So any of the anecdotes I might share, a lot of them were what I learned in that time there, although we've got other anecdotes which relate to other parliaments as well. I'll have a few little handouts, not that important, but you may be interested in some of the photos of Parliament House, and particularly the parliamentary calendar, which I've got. In fact, I'll start handing that out now. Yeah, just passing that around. It happens that we're going to be here. We are sitting here today. This is the kick-off today of the parliamentary sittings for the spring session of the federal parliament, and you'll see that shows up in blue on that sheet. So if you could just pass that around, that would be good. The spring session, as usual, will be tumultuous for somebody. I don't know for who, but it always is. There's always somebody in the garden. Some of this will be light-hearted, other bits a bit more serious. A lot of what I say is almost, I'm not saying it's past tense for us, because by definition we're all old, but a lot of it is actually really important to our children and to our grandchildren, because I think we are headed into some pretty interesting times for our democracy, and some bits of what are now unfolding is I'm pretty concerned about. It seems to be a very much a changing scene from when we were young. Okay, just some of the formal stuff. We have a parliament which is bicameral, and that means it's two chambers. And that arrangement was resolved in the 1890s when 7 colonies came together, 7 British colonies came together and started negotiating how to create one dominion south of the one British dominion south of the equator. And in the end, they took some some good ideas out of the British Parliament, and they merged that with some good ideas out of the US Congress, and we've ended up with a bicameral Parliament. The so-called upper house, the Red House, is comprised of senators, 75 senators now, and the lower house is called the House of Reps, which has quite a lot of resemblance to the US lower house. Our lower house currently has 150 members in it, each representing an individual electorate. Now, just to check, which electorate are we in here?
Jaga.
Which is held currently by Kate Floyd.
That's right.
Yeah. Does anybody know David, her dad?
Yes.
Long time local solicitor practicing out of a shop in the Rosanna shops. Yeah. For these lower house seats, worth recognising that they broadly have the same number of people in each electorate. The subtlety being that the Tasmanian, by protection in our original constitution, Tasmania can never go below 5 seats. And given Tasmania has 500,000 people, broadly, each of their 5 seats have 100,000 voters, whereas here on the mainland right now, our electorates now comprise about 190,000 people each. So if you want to have influence, think about moving to Tassie. They have their 5 lower house seats with some influence, and they have even more courtesy of the Senate, because they have 12 senators, the same as we do for Victoria or New South Wales. But yeah, that's the formal composition of our current Parliament. Also worth saying early on is that in the Constitution is a nexus between the number of senators and the number of House of Reps. And it's mandated that there's got to be really no more, if there's ex-senators, at the moment there's 76, then there's got to be no more than twice that number of House of Reps. And in my view, that's not a good idea. I think the House of Reps is far more important, and if you're going to increase our Parliament, I'd be increasing the number of House of Reps members. I wouldn't be increasing the number of senators, and I'll explain that later. Okay, a few more housekeeping things. We've got an electoral system where we have we all vote about once every 3 years. There's some really good news about our form of democracy. That is that we have compulsory voting. You say, why is that important? Well, I think it is important because if you don't have compulsory voting, you can have some quite strange results. Just look at the USA today. And Donald Trump has been elected president on about 1/3 of the total population because it's not compulsory, and I think that's regrettable. So we've got compulsory voting. We also have this thing called preferential voting, where if our first preference for House of Reps seat doesn't get up, then our vote flows on to our second preferences start to count, and so on. And again, it's not as vital as the compulsory voting, but it is a good way of distributing the democracy. It's better than the British one. British model is first past the post. So that means if you get if there's 3 candidates and you get 33% of the vote, you're in, regardless of whether the preferences for the other 2 might have overwhelmed you. But the British one, you tend to have strong swings to the Tories. Then right now it's been a strong swing to Labor, but preferential tends to iron that out. Another important thing to understand for us is that our lower house, the Green Chamber, is the dominant house. It's where all money bills kick off from. So it's pretty important for the Treasurer to be there, and it is absolutely front and centre important for the Prime Minister of the day to be there. I'm looking around the room. I think we're all old enough to remember when Harold Holt went for his swim in Bass Strait. The Liberal Party, they looked around for successor Prime Minister, and they picked on Senator John Gordon. And he was a senator, so they had to quickly shuffle around and find a vacant. They managed to vacate a Victorian lower house seat, and John Gordon got himself then elected as a lower house member, so he could be our Prime Minister. So the lower house is really vital in terms of the money bills, and where most significant legislation is launched. The rhythm of the Parliament, I've touched on this, I think, in this group before, but it is an interesting rhythm, and you'll see it in that calendar I'm handing around. About 22 weeks a year of sittings, about 6 weeks of committee hearings, and then about 24 weeks of non-sitting. And what that means for our members, and use Kate Thwaite as an example, is that our members of Parliament live in their electorates for about 24 weeks a year, and then for the other 22 plus 6, about 28 weeks, they've packed their bags, they're on a plane, and they're basically living a Canberra lifestyle. And the group of friends and associates they've got up there can be very, very different to their family support down here. And along the way, that leads to an awful lot of interesting relationships, including extramarital relationships and other scandalous things. And over the year, there's been lots of journalists busy outing this or that Polly because of relationships, but there's also been people who've really enjoyed outing various journalists who've formed relationships with various politicians. The prudent journalists have that right out in the open. For example, in Canberra, we had, in my time living in Canberra, Chris Yeoman, anchor for the ABC, he married Gai Brotman, who was the MHR for Canberra. But they both made it sure that everybody knew that, so there was no chance of a scandal because it was public domain knowledge. It's the ones where they try and keep it private where the scandals tend to erupt. The other important thing about our Parliament House as a building is that it's the home for the pollies, it's the home for the support staff, but it also is the base where the National Press Gallery hang out. Now these days, in the olden days, the Press Gallery was about 8 or 9 print media journalists who came up from Melbourne when the capital transferred from Melbourne in 1927. These days, the Press Gallery comprises print journalists, comprises TV journalists, and comprises cameramen. There's about 300 of them who actually occupy space in the building above the Senate offices. And they're very much part and parcel of a business day. Like today, they'll be busy all around the building interviewing government ministers, interviewing the opposition, and then sending out their articles into the Oz or the SMH or wherever, and pieces to camera, which will show up on the 9 News and whatever tonight. In total, just run through who's involved with the total building. You've got, today there'll be 226 pollies in the building. That's the 76 senators and the 150 MHRs. They'll have a support staff of about 500 people in their offices. They're called advisors and DLOs, Departmental Liaison Officers. There's about 1,600 in the support staff who are not political. They're the sort of people I looked after, the guards, the library people, the Hansard people, the external security people. They're all non-political support staff. Then you've got the press gallery, probably about 300 today. There will be visitors to the building. The average number of visitors per each day is about 2,500. Right now, this afternoon, I'll guarantee there'll be a lot of our grandchildren there because there's all these school groups washed through, and there will be a lot of them will get into question time this afternoon. And the final group who will be there today will be lobbyists. And how many hundred there are at any one time, I don't know. I know there's about 2,000 lobbyist passes have been issued to lobbyists. So a significant number of those people, men and women, from charities, from business groups, from unions, all sorts of different people. They'll be in and around the building trying to influence the pollies about this or that, a myriad different subjects where they're trying to persuade the pollies to vote this way or vote that way. Probably today, just thinking about what's on the hot agenda, there's a whole lot of stuff about restricting gambling advertising. So it won't surprise me if people from all bodies like the AFL, like the Rugby League, are there because for them that gambling advertising is life and blood for their codes. Again, about the personal interactions in the building, because the pollies move to and fro from their electorates up there and back, there is this set of interactions with each other and with the staff. When they're there, and this week is probably a good example, they will work, they and their staff will work really hard. The hours when you're in the building often start at 7 in the morning and finish at 10 at night. That'll be today. Tomorrow will be the same, Thursday will be the same. The nurses' station, which I looked after, will almost certainly be treating various young advisors who've only had 10 cups of coffee today, and they're wondering why they're feeling unwell. There might be other substances as well, but an awful lot of it is just overdosing on coffee. There'll be the odd heart event and so on as well, but the whole thing about working such long hours does lead to a lot of ill health. The other thing that contributes to ill health is there will be all sorts of events on over the next 3 days, and booze is too available in the building. You might have heard me talk about this before. If I was redesigning the building, I'd have all the event spaces in a separate building where you had to walk across a road into the workspace of the Parliament. But it's not that way. It wasn't designed that way. The event spaces, the Great Hall, all sorts of other spaces, they're intermingled with where the members' offices are, where the ministers are. So it's just so easy to have a drink and then go back to your office. And if you only have one drink, that's okay. But at times, various staff and MPs do drink too much, and it does lead to all sorts of bad results. You think the most recent huge profile set of those events revolved around Brittany Higgins and a fellow called Bruce Lemon, and it also dragged into its vortex of awfulness an innocent minister, a Liberal minister called Linda Reynolds, and her chief of staff who tried to help Ms Higgins, but both Linda and Fiona Brown got dragged into it. Their names were dragged through the mud, and it's taken 2 major court cases and a lot of money to get their names cleared. It's trashed a lot of their lives. It's cost Brittany Higgins a lot of her payout in defending herself. Whatever the payout was, I think it was 2.4 million. A lot of that's now gone in lawyers' fees. And all about misbehaving in the building just messy. And I must say, if I could redesign the building and have booze over there and work over there, I'd be doing that every time. Let's go back into some much more positives about our democracy. This is partly about the Parliament, but a lot about our democracy. Some really good things about our democracy. Most of us have pride in our country. Not all of us, but most of us. Most of us do respect our national Parliament and our head of state. Head of state is currently Sam Mostyn, and we also generally respect the Queen, or now the King, albeit that they're off in a different country, but there's generally good respect there. Another huge plus for us is we have an electoral commission which is honest. And you say, so what? Well, an awful lot of other countries have electoral commissions which are not honest. The minor part of it is they'll stack electorates, so they'll try and swing it so they can get more of one party elected versus another. But the bigger part of an honest electoral commission is vote counting at the general elections. Ours is a very good system, and they're really very much obliged to vote, to count the votes accurately, so we can be pretty confident that if somebody just gets over the line, yes, they did, they were genuinely 50 votes in front of an opposition candidate. Another big strength we've had to date, and it's been in place for at least 50 years, is we've had pretty stable coalition governments. And when I say coalition, I'm including both the obvious coalition of the Liberal Party has been forming coalitions with the Country Party and our National Party, but also on the left side, be fair to say the Australian Labor Party is really a coalition between a strong right wing, exemplified by people like Bob Hawke and Paul Keating, and a left wing, who tend to have more socialist attitudes, but they've come together and they've stuck together for the last 50 years, they've stuck together as one party. And the advantage for us as electors is when they go to an election, both coalitions, they say, we'll do this, we'll do that, we'll do the other, and then you can hold them to that after the election, because that's what they said, and the coalition stuck and they've got a majority. There's a lot of other jurisdictions where that's not the case. I worked in New Zealand, and in New Zealand, basically they form coalitions after the vote. And so if it's national, holding the most seats, they still won't have a majority, so they'll have to form a coalition with some other parties. And as they form those coalitions, each party has to give away on some aspects of what they said they'd do. So you do find that after all the sparring in New Zealand, about probably 5 or 6 weeks after the election, the Prime Minister of the day is able to say, well, having negotiated this collection of parties, here's our new agenda, and probably might be 80% is what the major party said, but 20% will be things that one of the minor parties wants to see in place. Now that's once you get used to it, you live with it. And New Zealanders have been living with that model for, I guess, 30 years now. But it is different to ours, and I think we're headed into a future where that forming coalitions after our elections will become a reality. And I'll come back to that in a minute. Another strength we've got, and this is a new initiative, we now have a National Anti-Corruption Commission. It's been in place for 3 years. The initial chief of it, Paul Brereton, hasn't covered himself in glory, but at least there is now somebody akin to the New South Wales ICAC, which has the power to go and investigate wrongdoing on the part of the pollies or their administration, and believe you me, that is important. It does keep people on the straight and narrow. So there's some really good strengths of our current democracy. I'll now just give a snapshot a different way about 4 governments that I think were really important for Australia. There's 2 ALP and there's 2 Conservative. The first would be the Curtin government through World War II. John Curtin, he was only our PM for about 3.5 years until he died in 1945. But it was John Curtin as the PM and a fellow called Ben Chifley as our treasurer, kept us on the rails and delivered us through the back of the last 2/3 of World War II. And here we are, we're still speaking English rather than Japanese. We maintained our independence from the US. There was a slight risk of the US almost taking us over, but they were a very, very good government of that era. The second coalition I'll quote was the Menzies, the second Menzies government from 1949 through to 1966. In that case, it was Bob Menzies as our PM, and he had a treasurer called Artie. Initial one was Artie Fadden, and the second was Harold Holt. And again, that combination of Menzies as PM and Fadden and then Holt as treasurer were very, very good to a lot of us. and create some really good positives which a lot of us will have benefited from, not least the creation of more university places and more universities and more university places, which let a lot of us get a tertiary education, which would have been unheard of before World War II. The third one I'll quote is Bob Hawke with his treasurer Paul Keating. And again, the Hawke Keating government instituted a whole lot of quite radical changes to Australia, but in the end they've been really good for us as a country. I'm differentiating from Paul Keating's government, which I've had some personal reservations about, but the Hawke Keating model was good. And the final one was John Howard and Peter Costello. And again, they instituted some really big changes into tax, and again, that has left our country in much better shape. So they're examples of really, really good governments, intermingled with a whole series of other governments that didn't take the country anywhere. It's very sad, but when you look at a lot of the other governments we've had since 1901, they didn't take us anywhere much at all. So we've had some good ones, but others haven't been so good. The thing that caught my eye when I put these four together is they've been a combination of a really good PM to speak to the community and the backup of a really good treasurer to ask the hard questions. Because most ministers, when they get to power, they just want money for health or education or whatever. So you've got to have somebody in the background asking the hard questions. How do you ration the taxpayers' money between health, education, defence? And in general, that's been the job of the treasurer of the day, to ask those hard questions. So that's why I think those four are good. And a lot of the other ones we've had, including in recent times, through those Liberal years and the Gillard and Rudd era, I'm not sure they were very good for our country at all. The four good ones intermingled with a lot of also-rans. Further thing just worth thinking about is a quote from Winston Churchill. He was a very important part of democracy through the 40s and 50s, but Churchill had this perception about democracy. Quote, "Democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others that have been tried." And I think he's spot on. There's all sorts of flaws in democracy, all sorts of bad things and weaknesses, but it is far better than the various forms of left-wing and right-wing dictatorships. So with that said, just worth looking at some of the weaknesses of our democracy. Number one is the very shallow leadership pool you have. The vast majority of our political leaders, they will move into being involved in politics in some way in their early 20s. They'll then, it might be as an advisor in a minister's office, it might be as a union organiser, it might be working for a lobby group pushing this or that agenda. So their experience in the real world is often very shallow. The second is, connected to the first, is there's a huge difference between the skills you need to get elected and the skills you need to govern. And in recent times, I think Kevin Rudd and Tony Abbott, they were both world champions at getting themselves elected. They ran fantastically good campaigns against the incumbents, but once they got to power, after a couple of years, they imploded. They just didn't know how to steer the ship properly, and both of them got booted out by their own parties because they couldn't lead the whole way through. It's almost a miracle that you can have a political leader who's both good at getting elected and then governing effectively. Just at a personal level, I was part of the Victorian Kane and Kerner Labor governments, and we knew we were going to have a really tough election in 1992. We strongly suspected this strange guy from Surrey Hills called Geoffrey Kennett would become the new Liberal Premier, and we had vast reservations about him about what he'd be like as a Premier. In the end, he was a very good Premier. Okay, you might not like his agenda, but between he and Stockdale, they rectified some pretty disastrous finances for Victoria and took us forward. But I must say, beforehand, we were a bit sceptical because he was a good campaigner, but we could see, you know, we just weren't sure whether he was going to be good once he got elected. Okay, move on. Another weakness of our democracy, of course, is this thing about the way they all get caught up in trying to win the news battle today. So they focus on winning some point this week and don't really realise where that's taken them over the weekend. It's just often the political gamesmanship is just about winning a point this week. Rudd was a classic at that, but both sides of politics do it. And then Morrison was another one who won a point this week, but by next week he'd forgotten her, and it just was not a good way of leading a country. The other weakness, of course, is government. Within a government, they're rarely united. And here I'm going to quote from one Jim Hacker. Remember who Jim Hacker was? Yes, Prime Minister. And Jim Hacker, he had this quote. He said, "The opposition is in front of me, but my enemies are behind me." And right now, you can think of the ALP government. Albo's doing quite a good job, but you can see circling around behind him. Right? I've identified 4 who are there at the moment who would aspire, undoubtedly, to take over from Albo, and in their view, sooner rather than later. Think Jim Chalmers, think Jason Clare, the education guy, think Richard Marles from Geelong, and maybe even Chris Bowen. He had a go at being the opposition leader briefly, and my suspicion is he'd like the chance again. So Albo's behaviours, like most PMs, is to always have to look over his shoulder. Further weakness of our democracy, and this is actually quoting from Anthony Albanese. He gave quite an insightful set of interviews about just a few months ago. And to quote, "Politics is not for the faint-hearted." And he went on to cite some pretty awful stuff. There are increasing personal attacks on both political leaders and MHRs and senators, and that's both physical attacks, verbal attacks, online attacks, fake images on the websites, really nasty stuff, and at times their electorate officers get defaced, their staff get attacked. In recent times, and I live in Port Melbourne. Our local member is Josh Burns, Jewish guy, electorate office down Caulfield Way. It's been trashed multiple times over the last 2 or 3 years. Just awful. And I think the same happened to Albo's office in Sydney straight after the attacks of Hamas against Israel. Different way of looking at politics is to think of it through the lens of one Harold Macmillan. Remember who Harold Macmillan was? Yeah. Quite a distinguished Tory, British PM in the late 50s, early 60s. And his perspective was about, to quote, "Events can change everything." And it is quite interesting what he was driving at. I've read some of his literature, and I'll just pluck out some examples in recent times. I'll pick out 4 where it's good news for the politician of the day. There's 4, and then I'll give you some where it's the reverse. For example, good news for one, Maggie Thatcher, that the Falklands War happened. She'd been elected British Prime Minister, but she was adrift. She wasn't doing very well. Then she got lucky. Argentina attacked the Falklands, and she became the heroine. And she could do no wrong for the next 8 or 9 years. Just amazing how that one event took her from a try-hard to being a heroine. A similar one happened in our country, 1996. John Howard, just elected, then the Port Arthur massacre happened. And Howard, to his enormous credit, pushed back on the gun lobby and took us forward as a country that didn't sponsor rampant gun ownership. And we all gave him the credit for that and respected his fortitude in pushing back. The third one, which I saw up close, was 2003. Canberra was having bushfires out in the hills to our west, and we knew at some stage they'd come towards Canberra, but in the meantime they were out there in the hills to the west. Our chief minister, a fellow called John Stanhope, went out in a chopper to look at what was happening with these fires, and another chopper had an accident and crashed into a reservoir out there. And the pilot was clearly in deep trouble. John, who was quite a fit guy, stripped off, swam across the lake, rescued the pilot. And he became quite a hero in Canberra. And even though the fires did then sweep into Canberra, John could do no wrong. He became quite a charismatic leader through the fires and the subsequent recovery. Whereas if he'd not done that act of bravery, he would have been vilified like a lot of bushfire premiers suffer grievously, but John survived very well. And the final one I'll quote is 9/11, where George W. Bush was a try-hard president of the US. I don't think any of us thought he'd be more than one-term president. But 9/11 happened. He was able to go to New York and look heroic, and he got 2 terms. So they're ones where the event has made the politician, if you like, the hero. In the reverse, think about our very own Kevin Rudd, where he claimed that climate change was the thing that would divide. We had to fix this up. It was the most important thing ever, until he got too tired and then he collapsed and he left it to a junior minister to step out of it. And that was early 2010, and opinion polls plunged for Kevin and led to his being, if like, services were terminated by his Labor Party colleagues. So that was one. The next, another one was Scott Morrison with the Higgins land affair, where Morrison did not handle that well, and again his standing with us was badly diminished. It wasn't the only reason he lost the prime ministership or lost the election, but it certainly diminished him badly. The other two were to do with New South Wales politicians. There's poor old Barry O'Farrell, quite a good premier, until he couldn't answer a question on talkback radio about a high-end bottle of wine. And suddenly he went from somebody high-end respected premier to somebody going to be subject to an ICAC investigation. And Barry had to resign. And the final one was, again, New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian, doing a fantastically good job until she had the bad judgment to team up with dodgy Darrell. And suddenly it went for big. Gladys, and she was terrific through COVID. I had friends who worked for her. They were absolutely amazed at how competent and hard-working she was. But dodgy Darrell did her in and she resigned. So just giving you an example of the way politics can go from, you can be apparently on a plateau, and then an event either makes you a hero or it knocks you badly. I'm approaching the end of my talk, but in one sense this is the most important bit of it. Threats and opportunities for us. Number one thing that is interesting for us, I know we're all older people now, but this amazing current voter disillusion and this amazingly high vote in all sorts of ways for One Nation. And One Nation is a group of people who are disillusioned with lots of things. We know what they're against. We don't know much what they're for. But hey, One Nation has just won a federal seat, a federal lower house seat, Farrer in southern New South Wales. Wow, that's amazing. And all the opinion polls say that One Nation candidates might well have the balance of power when we go to vote in our state elections in November this year. Wow, that's very different to anything we've seen for many, many years. The nearest equivalent I can give to it, and we're all old enough to remember, this was when the DLP split from the ALP in the early 50s, when it was a splinter group which made it almost impossible for Labor to govern for the next many years. But it is fascinating to see this disillusion that we it appears to be about 30% of us are saying we support one nation. Pretty amazing. And that could well lead to what I was talking about before, the notion of hung parliaments where a bigger party tries to form a coalition in some way with some minor parties. New Zealand does it reasonably well. Some other countries don't do it nearly as well. Probably the classic example is Israel. Because of the way they're elected, virtually all their governments are coalitions, and some of those coalition partners are very feral. And whether it's Netanyahu as a PM or others, he's got people in his cabinet who don't even vaguely think like him, and trying to be people are contemptuous about aspects of Netanyahu as well, but I must say it's a genuine democracy, but it's not a good model. And I just hope we don't descend into something like that. Another interesting thing that could unfold is this current Royal Commission about anti-Semitism. I don't know what the findings will be, but my suspicion is that in places like inner Sydney and inner Melbourne, the findings could be pretty divisive. I just don't know what they'll be, but there's large groups of Islamic voters. There's also a very strong Jewish vote, and just how Commissioner Bell finally deliberates, and then how the Albanese government deals with that, I don't know. And now I'm on my last sheet of thoughts. One thing that's worth, other presentations I've done, there's people say, couldn't we have more MPs so we don't have too many electors for every MP? Couldn't we, instead of having 150, couldn't we go up as a country to have maybe 200 MPs? I'm not so sure about that. I'm deeply attracted to the US model. The US Congress, the lower house, has had 435 members since 1928. Think about that. That's when the US had a population of 120 million, and now it's got a population about triple that. Their model is to say for each congressperson or congressman, it used to be congressman, it's now congresspeople, they are now given a much larger group of electorate staff. So every electorate district, they have about 20 support staff. So every congressman in their electorate out in upstate New York, they'll have 20 people to deal with constituent issues and to communicate with them. That, to me, has quite some merit. That's just a personal view. A further thing that I'll just throw on the table, and this harks back to the voice referendum. Having lived in New Zealand, I've witnessed a different form of having First Nations represented. New Zealand Parliament, they have Maori seats. They have 7 of them at the moment. This model's been in place only since 1870. So it's been there a long time. And us as individuals, we can decide we're going to be Maori, we can vote in those 7 seats, or we can vote in the mainstream. But it is a good way for Maori people to have a voice in the Parliament. And I must say, I've written to Anthony Albanese and have not had a reply. There you go. And the final point, before I stop babbling on, is just my view about the current PM and his treasurer. My view is the jury is still out, because I've got no doubt that Albo is earnest and hard-working. I've got no doubt that Jim Chalmers is a champion speaker in front of a camera. He's world-class in terms of his cred there. But my question is, at the end of their time, will we look back on that as a government which looked after not so much our interests, but the interests of our children and our grandchildren? Those other 4 that I've quoted I think I could say that all four of them did leave Australia a better place for our grandchildren. I'm not so sure yet about the Albo Chalmers pair of senior people. That's what I'm proposing to end my talk, but very happy to take any questions or comments. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Alan. Now, any questions for Alan? Yeah.
Alan, fantastic speech. Thank you. I've learned so much more than I've forgotten. Can you tell me why, in your opinion, the ABC has gone so far left?
Yeah.
The Fox has gone far too right.
Yeah. Look, it's number one. It's not a new phenomenon. I mean, this has been running for decades. I don't have a good answer. I mean, they've periodically they've appointed a chair or a chief executive who's come from a different mindset, if you like. But nevertheless, then there are these periodic, I call them misbehaviours. I mean, the latest one about Gina Reinhardt is revolting, and I'm just totally appalled. And I just hope people like Hugh Marks deal with it very firmly. It's I mean, my way of handling it is that I don't listen to the ABC. I'm sorry, but I just I try and be fair about politics. I do watch their news occasionally, but I also share my viewing habits with the commercial stations because I'm just stunned at how they've presented some things, and I just think it's not right. Yeah. I wish I could give you a better answer. Yeah.
Any thoughts on the Victorian situation where the change of Premier in the last few weeks and what might have led to it? And
well, look, I suppose I would say the Victorian Labor situation was sliding downhill very, very, very rapidly, and finally that collection of current Labor MPs could see the writing on the wall. They were dead certain to lose the November election. All the opinion polls were telling them that. The anecdotal stuff about them knocking on householders' doors and people refusing to even talk to them while they had the current Jacinta Allen as the Premier gave them some pretty strong messages. What we've now got is a situation where the new Premier, I'm sorry, it is a bloke, but new Premier, he will certainly make it a bit tougher for the Libs to get in. I suspect the Libs are mourning the departure of Jacinta Allen because it would have been a complete steamroller if she'd stayed in. Not least just for what's happened in the last 24 hours. And I've got my wife and her sister driving down from New South Wales. In fact, they've just driven down from Brisbane. They just came into Victoria late last night. I stopped in Wangaratta, and there's the pothole thing is just a shambles. And it is, trust me, it is Victoria. There's no potholes in Queensland. There's no potholes in New South Wales. They're in Victoria because the Andrews government and the Allen government gutted the roads budgets. And it's once you do that, it just creates this bad odour. So look, I suspect that the new Premier will manage some expectations. I see, even as I drove out here, that the whole thing about working from home. This is new news. Maybe I'm passing it on to you. The whole thing about working from home has been deferred from September this year to a date mid next year after the election. So he'll leave it to the electors to decide whether they want it as part of his pre-election rather than inflicted on voters before the election. I think he's obviously he's got some good support. I mean, I'm very impressed that he has Steve Bracks as one of his main mentors. So I suspect it'll be a fairly tough race. a personal sort of interest in the whole thing is that my kids all went to Mount Albert Primary School. Hold that thought. Jess Wilson also went to Mount Albert Primary School. So there's a whole series of people out there. So the scary thing for all of us is Jess Wilson is younger than any of my kids. She's only 35 years old. It's amazing, you know. But yeah, let's wait and see. But I think it'll be an interesting election. My strong suspicion is that it'll be essentially no one party will have a majority, and that One Nation will have at least some upper house seats and may hold some of the lower house seats. And just how that's done, or how that translates into a government, not sure.
Thanks, Alan. Thank you.
Anything else? Okay, Alan, thank you. We've got a little gift for you
Thank you very much.
to enjoy
Thank you
and
very much.
reflect upon as you've analysed the political scene. But we're very grateful. I mean, this is the second time Alan has come, and it's very kind of him to make his time available, and in particular to share his experience, because when you look at where he's been, state governments, federal government, ACT and New Zealand, he's got a pretty good perspective on the situation, and we're in a position where we've got to be doing a bit of thinking over the next few months.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
All right, thank you.